My name is Jeremy Walton, and this is the cinematography of SHŌGUN. Let's go! When it comes to watching television, we have a lot of options. At times, it feels like too many, and I don't want to start watching a new show before I finish the 3 I'm already watching. And what if it sucks, or a waste of time? I can't get into it, it's too slow. You get the point. Then you have the 2024 FX series SHŌGUN, which features a handful of directors and cinematographers. This is a standout show for many reasons that I will get into. After seeing the trailer with its captivating visuals, I knew this would be a show worth watching. I was a little late to the game, episode 5 was already out. After watching the pilot, I was all in and started looking up information to film this video about the cinematography. Whether you liked it or not, and yes, there are some people who really dislike the cinematography, as a filmmaker, I think it's worth knowing how these filmmakers tackled something like SHŌGUN for modern audiences. Maybe it'll be something you'll want to lean into or stay away from. That's for you to decide. As always, let's start with the cameras on hand. For that, let's go to IMDb and have a look. Under details, we do see some other cameras being used, along with a variety of lenses, but I did my research and their main camera was the Sony Venice. From what I could find, the cinematographer Christopher Ross was familiar with the Sony Venice and knew it was the right choice. I love the way it works in terms of highlights, and I liked it combined with anamorphic lenses, so I was pretty sure that it was the camera for SHŌGUN. And that's about it for cameras. Luckily, there's a lot more to cover in terms of the look that involves lenses and how the show was going to evolve that look over time. That's what I found interesting. Lens choices have become a big deal, even more than cameras when you're after a certain look. What stood out to me is when one of the directors, Jonathan Van Tulleken, talked about the show having a strong visual voice. A visual voice is important when so much of what we see is John Blackthorne's POV. We started to settle on this idea of how to express this subjectivity, how to express John Blackthorne's disorientation. The film they turned to for inspiration was the 1979 film Apocalypse Now, directed by Francis Ford Coppola. When it comes to point of view, lenses, framing, story, this is worth watching if you haven't, and I can see why it was used for reference. We really wanted to take some of that and create a world that was sort of intoxicating and also felt dangerous and sometimes disorienting. For me, the pilot was disorienting. My only knowledge was from what I saw from the trailer, so I was a little confused at first. I was asking myself many questions, and looking back, a lot of that was guided by the cinematography, either because of things I was aware of, or I'm sure subconscious things. How do we take this very perfect thing in the digital cameras we use, and also in these beautiful austere sets and these incredible rich costumes? And how do we break it so we're not fetishizing it, we're not turning it into a fantasy? For these filmmakers, they turn to Hawk anamorphic lenses. I'm a fan of these lenses. There have been many times I've really liked a specific look and surprised they were Hawks. For SHŌGUN, they used a combination of Hawk and Vantage glass that really has a distinct look. I was drawn to the Hawk Class X anamorphics, particularly for the softness and the falloff of the wider lenses toward the edges of the frame. I thought that served Blackthorne's first-person narrative well. Anamorphics are amazing lenses. You may have seen cheaper anamorphics on the market now, and a lot of people think they're cinematic, depending on your definition. But Tulleken does give some advice about using these lenses. You need a great crew, you need a great cinematographer, you need people who really understand those lenses. You need a great focus puller. You need a great camera assistant. The lenses break, they fall apart. I don't think it's for the casual hand. Ross also went on to explain that they didn't have a blueprint to shoot something 400 years ago. You have to experiment to get the audience's attention. This is where you'd see those swirls, like the background has been smeared across the screen. You would see barrel distortion, a fisheye, and this was always to serve the story. Blackthorne arrives to a strange land. There is confusion, there's a sense of alienation, a new language, and these tools they used with anamorphic lenses served as the visual voice of the story. We wanted to be more visceral and more first person, wanted to put the audience in the protagonist's shoes, so that led us to think that we would be jumping into their sphere of influence within 3 feet of the character's space. At times you would even see the vignetting, and that was left in on purpose. It wasn't a mistake. A lot of those shots were at a T2.3 to T2.8 to ensure those aberrations, and with Blackthorn scenes shooting at 35mm to 45mm, which would coincide with the filmmaker's objectives. They also leaned into a Japanese concept called wabi-sabi, which in short means beauty and perfection are inextricably linked, and if that's what they were going for, then I think that's what we got. This is a great example of putting the time and effort in creating a look to serve the story. Overall, the response to SHŌGUN has been good, and if we strip away all of what we've talked about, we're only left with the story, which is worth watching. For the people that weren't fans of the cinematography, you're not wrong. Just because I like something doesn't mean I'm right. That'll be something you encounter as a filmmaker, and we can see with SHŌGUN. The filmmakers wanted to convey this alienation, confusing style, which some people 100% felt. But in why they chose to use those visuals for the character's alienation and confusion, which, yeah, I don't know what to say about that. They felt the right things, but for the wrong reasons, if that makes sense. That is something you may have to consider as a filmmaker. My take on it is, this stuff has been around for a long time. As a kid, I've watched a ton of television and films that had a visual style through lenses, color, editing, film stocks. I'm sure you have examples of your own. I've talked about it before, but the film Traffic, directed by Steven Soderbergh, has very distinct looks, one being the drug czar storyline with a dominant blue hue and black with desaturated colors. That came out in 2000. Jump forward to 2017 and we have the show Ozark. I've covered that series and I remember people being confused by the blue look they used. I'm sure there's not a whole lot you can do. If you're making choices based on what serves the story, I think you'll be good. And SHŌGUN, despite some of these criticisms, has done well. I think if you're trying to go out there and make something interesting and make something that captures people's attention, it is impossible to please everyone. If any of this was distracting, just so you know, over the course of this season, this does fade as Blackthorn starts to become more familiar with his surroundings. This show has an evolution, it has an arc, and I really believe in the grammar of the shots, that they should show the escalating arc of a scene and of a story and a series. We kept the same anamorphic lenses, we kept the same cameras, but not every scene needed what we were doing. I also want to take the time to say that even though I am talking a lot about cameras and lenses, there is a lot more to a look of a series than those two things. Let's not forget how important the production design is. Look at those locations. They did an amazing job, from the costumes to the way someone walks, handles a weapon, their hair. The attention to detail sold it. They even used period appropriate indoor lighting. There are rules about when fires would be lit, when and how many oil lamps would be used, how a village would light its streets at night. There is an order to everything. A lot of work went into all the departments to make this show feel authentic, and that paid off. The last element that I was impressed by was the visual effects. If you haven't already, go check out some BTS. Sometimes a TV show's visual effects doesn't keep up with the movies, but I think they went all out for SHŌGUN. Basically, we're making a 10-part feature here. The scale of the visual effects reflects that. For SHŌGUN, they were doing 5,000 to 6,000 visual effect shots. They had tens of thousands of soldiers, castles, earthquakes, storms, shipwrecks. Basically, they did it all with the idea of making it feel real. They created a believable world that I personally enjoyed. The show was a risk that FX took a gamble on. This wasn't cheap by any means. They could have played it safe, we've seen that done before, but I'd much rather see someone taking a risk, and it sounds like FX let the filmmakers do their thing. No one ever said, I think this thing is too much. It was always a sense of, how can we push the show? How can we live up to the ambition of the show? It was an astoundingly supportive environment to make something in. There's more I could go into. I think the subtitles were done really well. That might not be something you may consider part of cinematography, but when you learn they made sure the color contrast was right, they shifted the subtitles up so you weren't always looking down to read them. Yeah, I think it's part of the visual voice. If you have the time, go watch SHŌGUN. I think you'll get something out of it. Well, there you have it, the cinematography of SHŌGUN. Hope you enjoyed the video. Hit that like button because there's definitely more on the way. Subscribe so you don't miss out. Leave a comment if you have questions. Until next time, it's a wrap.